We all know that one day we're going to shuffle off this mortal coil, this life, these familiar surroundings, and we'll leave behind us the possessions of a lifetime. Let's hope that when this happens, those who take over our objects will treat them gently and respectfully, because often the stories they tell reveal more about us than we ever disclosed in life. Today's story is Rummaging, and it's by Stephanie Green. It was first published in Muse, March 1988, and performed on ABC Radio 6WF in May 1995. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland storyteller. My great-aunt lived in a house that had been condemned. We thought it extraordinarily mean of the Shire Council to try to evict her. After all, she had lived there safely for 60 years. There were no hot water taps at my great-aunt Rosa's house. She boiled water up on an old wood stove. She even chopped her own wood with a cunning old slippery-handled axe. There was no proper back door either. She shut herself in at night under a rain-stained canvas awning. Great-aunt Rose wrote to the Shire Council and told them she would not move from her home. They could wait until she was dead, she said, even if it meant squatting under siege like those homeless young people in the inner city. Squatting, she noted, was an Australian tradition. My great-aunt Rose looked nothing like my idea of a rose. Her face was like the skin of a pale lemon, porous, shiny, and sallow. Her bristly chin prickled my cheek when I had to kiss her, and her skin buckled into deep, soft-edged creases when she smiled. Rosa's, I thought, was smooth and soft. Then one day, when I was playing in the garden, my mother came out and sized up a rose bush that had gone scrawny and wild. She said, "Look at that old rose," and went off to find her pruning shears. I gazed at that wild old thorny bush and imagined that the blooms were its ears turned to the world, ragged and heavy with the things it heard, listening for my mother's return with the secateurs. I thought my great-aunt's ears were as pink and intricate as any rose. The thing I tell people about my great-aunt Rose is that she was knocked down and killed by a speeding police car on her 80th birthday. They had to call an ambulance to pick her up. The circumstances of her death shattered the family. They saw it as a symbol of social injustice, of what happened to pensioners who lived in condemned houses. "Capital," said my Uncle Jack, "has taken its revenge." In the 1970s, my Uncle Jack was famous for having his house curtained and carpeted in bold red, and for having pictures of Chairman Mao on the walls. He was also famous for riding his bicycle around town, his dumpy figure encased in a boiler suit and wearing a peaked denim cap. He was set to do battle with the Shire Council over the demolition notice. Great-aunt Rosa's death showed up corruption in the police force, he said. It ought to be publicly condemned. The family shook their heads. Great-aunt Rose was dead, and her house was now our weighty responsibility. While she lived, cats were constant visitors to her house. It always smelled of cat's piss until they tore it down. In the mornings, the cats came stealthily for food and conversation, and then at dusk slipped quietly out into the night. After she died, we opened all the doors and windows to let the smell out. A century of ghosts suffocated us, and we chased them out too, with light and air. We dug up her treasures and scattered them like a palmful of beads amongst the family. 80 years cluttered the old house. We became intrigued with the plethora of little things. There were old family photographs, letters written a century ago from England and Ireland, old china and empty lavender water bottles. I discovered a little green bottle of smelling salts, which I had always imagined contained some delicate, discreetly stirring fragrance, but I found when I opened it that my nostrils were blasted by ammonia. Every few minutes someone would come running through the echoing rooms with a new discovery, an ornament or a book or some priceless piece of family history. To me, we were uncovering a world I had previously only imagined. The olden days. Here was the evidence. There was no TV and no telephone in my great-aunt Rosa's house. There was instead an enormous collection of books. One might have expected Browning or Tennyson or Sir Walter Scott, but they were nearly all less than decorous westerns by W.C. Tuttle and Zane Grey, or torrid murder mysteries. They filled a whole room with tattered yellow paper spines, fading in the dust. She had not, it seemed, gone in for Barbara Cartland. We speculated about Great Aunt Rose's personality. She had seemed so sensible in her square brown shoes and her carefully pinned brooches. She had come to tea every Friday night with quiet regularity. Zane Grey and Gordon Bleak somehow did not fit in with the old woman we knew. We imagined her long nights next to the brown teapot on the stove, infused with adventure, discarding one fantasy after another until they choked the shelves. The really remarkable thing that entirely altered everything we had understood about Great Aunt Rose was finding her hats. The wardrobe in the front bedroom was full of hats. Some were 60 years old. There were head-hugging ones with cloth flowers, while others had sweeping brims. I instantly appropriated a green velvet number and went around the house in it with its brim turned up on one side and a thick black emu feather stuck into the other. It was not only the hats in themselves that proved to be so surprising, but what was hidden inside them. Near the bottom of the pile there were a few uninteresting ones. They lay there, shapeless grey and green creatures with nothing to say for themselves. To begin with, they contained money. Not a great deal, just $200 or $300. It was shocking to find she had never opened a bank account. As well, tucked inside the crumpled crown of the last hat to be packed into the charity box, was a little collection of letters. Of course, they were love letters, just 6 of them, from one woman to another. There was no evidence of how my great-aunt replied. The woman's name was Eleanor Thorne. Her letters began always, "To my sweetest Rose," and ended, "All my love always." Since it was I who found them, I managed to discover their contents before anyone else. After my mother saw the letters, she put them in a cupboard at the top of her wardrobe and would not allow anyone else to read them. My mother had always seen Great Aunt Rose as a spinster, as one alone. She had therefore always made a point of diligently including her in family affairs. Suddenly finding out that Great Aunt Rose had a lover, even in the spiritual sense, and that lover was a woman, made her into a far more intriguing and mysterious figure than she had ever seen before. Yet, in many ways, my mother could not come to terms with it, and kept the story hidden, even from other members of the family, for years. She began to see Great Aunt Rose as having kept us in the dark, and almost resented having taken the trouble to look out for her. It was as if Rose had turned out to be a stranger instead of a member of the family. The hat went to charity, along with many other little things I regarded as treasures. I managed to salvage a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles that had once belonged to Rose's mother. Later in life, once the lenses were changed, I took to wearing them. The old house was pulled down, although Uncle Jack insisted that they save all the old bricks to use to build a new one. Some of the old garden is still there too, with the weeds burying herbs and plants, the names of which only Rose knew. And that story was Rummaging by Stephanie Green. I hope you'll join me again this time next week when I'll have another short story of quality for you. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland Storyteller.